My childhood was like running through the backyards, down the street, and playing with the neighborhood kids, and then coming home when the street lights went on or when you heard your mom calling for you.
But yeah, we did a lot of that risk-based play too, and playing by a creek and shooting BB guns, like without any safety gear, and all sorts of things I wouldn't want to see my kids do because it terrifies me as an adult.
I think parents have this ill-defined sense of something could happen, and we don't even really know what that something is, but there's just this feeling of, if they're not with you, then how do I protect them? But they need that, because I'm not going to be there forever, and they need to navigate the world on their own.
I think we are certainly facing a physical inactivity crisis, that children today are less fit, they're weaker, and they are fatter than they were a generation ago. One of the reasons behind decline in physical activity is, I think, a decline in independent mobility and allowing opportunities for kids to travel to and from places, to go to places where they can play, where they can engage with nature. Recent research that we did looking at the social norms of physical activity in Canada, and we found that only 1 in 4 Canadian adults reported that they saw regularly children playing outdoors in their neighbourhood.
Children's independent mobility refers to a child's ability and freedom to travel around their neighborhood, to play outside, all without parental supervision. There's actually a hallmark study by Hillman and colleagues where they looked at independent mobility levels of children in England between the 1970s and 1990, and what they found was that in 1971, 80% of 7 to 8-year-olds were walking to school on their own or with their friends. But then by the 1990s, that percentage had dropped to 9%. So it's a huge decline, and this has been seen worldwide.
We have seen an increase in anxiety and depression rates. There's strong evidence to suggest that there could be a correlation there in terms of, as children's opportunities for this kind of independent, unstructured time has reduced, that their feelings of self-efficacy, of self-confidence, of being able to manage the world.
I think there are a lot of factors that explain why we've seen a decline in the independent mobility of children. Probably the most important factor is just this rising culture of fear, that we are becoming increasingly anxious, that the safety of our children is of course a very important concern.
What we found in a study that we've conducted in Canada is that when parents fear traffic or their child getting injured because of traffic or stranger danger, this negatively impacts children's independent mobility.
As we've seen more of a proliferation of parenting literature and recommendations, and even social media that shows you how other people are parenting, we have a fear of what other people will think of them as parents, for letting their kids out to play, or, if something happens to their kids, whether they were a bad parent. So we have fear, for example, of kidnapping. And so that partly is due with the fact that we get all this media around kidnapping. It seems like it happens all the time, when in fact it's extremely rare.
We also know that gender is one of the key kind of factors in terms of independent mobility, that girls are much less likely to have independent mobility than boys. Girls are much less physically active than boys as well. We have much greater concerns and anxieties about our daughters than we do about our sons, and that girls in general need to be much more protected than they do boys. And that has an implication and an impact on how much independent mobility that they have.
She's started to learn how to do some things independently in the kitchen. This summer she surprised me. I was feeling that I needed to take a break while I was gardening, and I turned around and there was a grilled cheese sandwich being brought out to me, which means that she thought of me and knew how to use all of the appliances necessary to make a grilled cheese sandwich. And then when I came in, she'd cleaned up.
I went to 2 cooking camps. I liked one cooking camp better because you were more independent, but at the other one, they gave you plastic knives. I think plastic knives are more dangerous because if you're trying to cut it and you can't cut it, then you might slide it, and if your hand's beside it, you might cut your hand.
So today is our last sort of trial run for Amelia to start taking public transit to school, and I think she's completely ready, but one more trial run today just to make sure that everything is completely smooth and ready to go. Bye, Peanut. Have a good day, sweetheart. I have mixed feelings. I'm really happy for her, and I know this is the right way to go. I think it's going to be great for her. I have some butterflies about it, but I know she's going to do really well. So yeah, and I have to take my own butterflies because they're less important than her independence.
I'm not nervous to take the TTC. I think kids are capable of being more independent.
There's this question of maturity, of when is a child old enough that they understand to look left and right and left again when they're crossing the road, for example. So I don't think there needs to be a set age where independent mobility is automatically transferred to a child. I think it's very much up to the individual child about when do they feel comfortable being able to independently travel and move around their neighborhood and their city.
The regulations about at what age can you leave your child alone at home or what age they can go out is not exactly clear. Some parents may fear, getting an anonymous complaint that their child was out and about.
I think that that's one of the things that's holding a lot of parents back is they're ready and their kids are ready, but they're afraid of judgment. First thing that floods the social media is where were the parents? The parents made a mistake. The parents should never have allowed that. When I first started allowing the kids to walk to the school bus, there was one day that they were a little ways ahead of me, and they rounded the corner, and a gentleman rounded the corner coming the other way. And he said to me, "Oh, thank goodness there's an adult. I was just concerned that those children were unsupervised." And I really felt the weight of that judgment, that if something had happened in that moment, that this person could have reported me, could have called the police if he hadn't seen an adult there. I think that's something that holds a lot of parents back as well.
In terms of the manifestation of the fear of other people's perception of your parenting, the more extreme example of that is the fear that somebody's going to call social services on you. For some low-income or Indigenous parents, they might be concerned that something happens to their kids because if anything happens, it could be interpreted in different ways. So for example, if your child shows up with a broken arm in a hospital, is it just, oh, kids will be kids and that they're just playing, or is it a sign of neglect? And that can look very differently depending on who the parent is showing up with that kid.
Where you live is associated with a range of socioeconomic factors. Certainly the type of household, the type of neighborhood that you live in, has an important bearing on independent mobility and levels of independent mobility, and particularly on parental concerns around independent mobility.
Higher income neighborhoods have richer kind of green spaces and parklands, and also, for example, their own backyards that offer richer outdoor play opportunities than you might have in lower income neighborhoods.
We see actually in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, there is actually greater independent mobility because active travel to and from school is much more of a necessity, or if parents are working, then perhaps kids have to be independently mobile.
No matter where a child lives, we need to look at policies that make it easier for families, for households to live and work closer to where kids go to school.
bike lanes, traffic signs that lower the speed around schools or in different areas to make it more safe for children to be out and about. What we found was actually cell phones were very helpful for parents to feel a little bit better, a little bit more confident that if something were to happen to their child could call them.
So we need to look at our own attitudes, our own perceptions as well, and perhaps challenge our own concerns that we may have about letting our kids roam independently without our supervision.
Every failure isn't a life-changing, disastrous event, but instead every failure is just an opportunity to learn and do better the next time. The message that you say to your child when you don't let them do things is, I don't think you can, I don't trust you, I don't have confidence in your ability. That's the underlying message. Is that what you want to say to your kids every single day? Is I don't trust you and I don't have confidence in your ability? No, obviously you do want to say that you do trust them and you do have confidence in their ability. Otherwise, how are they supposed to have confidence in their own ability if they hear that underlying message all the time?
So every child, no matter who they are, needs to have these experiences. They're able to play the way they want to play, that they can take risks, that they can really figure out what their body's capable of and how their world works. It's really about being sensitive to that child and putting the child at the center of any decision making. It's the same issues with children with special needs.
So he was going to my mom's house by himself, and it caused such angst in him, such panic. He really didn't like doing it, but we were pushing him. It's one bus, just one, straight to my mom's house.
Well, I had a detour.
And so he's following the blue line on Google Maps for exactly where he has to go. But there's several 100 buses. And he didn't.
And this one took a little detour, and then
he was so
and then it went off the blue thing, so I panicked and I got off, and yeah, and then I
what'd you do?
I called Nanny, and yeah, and then she came and picked me up.
She did. And he called us and we said, where are you? And so he had to describe where he was, and then
I knew where I was. No, I didn't.
You were pretty worried. When you have ADHD, the executive functioning is a lot more difficult. And that concept of, he may just wander off, and then what happens, right? And how do you manage yourself if you have gotten lost in one way or another? That's a huge thing to try to make sure that he has skills that allow him to.
He used to, if he'd gotten distracted in a store or something, he would have a complete meltdown because he was lost. And he hadn't moved. We'd moved maybe, or he'd moved and had wandered off the opposite direction from us in a store, and he'd be all upset that he was lost. So that was part of the anxiety and everything else. But so overcoming that was saying each step of the way gains confidence. I think that's an important part of dealing with those sense of giving them power over top of the anxiety or the doubts or whatever they have.
When Case was, grade 2, grade 3, we had the help of the Child Development Institute, and their SNAP program was hugely helpful. They're phenomenal. And I have to say, that little scaffolding way of dealing with things, take this one step and then take this next step, and it's really important. And it's had Case become the kid that he is now.
Baby steps may be the way to go, especially if your child doesn't have a lot of independent mobility. Just even taking that first step of walking with them around the neighborhood so that they can familiarize themselves with landmarks, with, there's a local shop, here's the school. Parents can see that the child is learning the environment. That gives them confidence. And as the child is exposed to the environment, they are also gaining confidence of, yes, I know my neighborhood.
So that was his big trip. He would go to the grocery store and pick something up for us that we needed, and that was...
And secretly pick up a chocolate bar. But
that was like a huge step that he took. Like, it was...
Then I can do it because of the chocolate bar.
We picked where we live because of the walk score, and yet, ironically, our kids take the bus to school, right? Like, which is 800 meters from our house. Like, that just seems crazy. So I always wondered what that adjustment would look like for them of suddenly the bus is gone and now you walk. And I didn't want that first time to be grade 7. I'm grateful that the bus didn't end up getting canceled at our school. It does still run, but the walking school bus has enabled us to actually bridge that gap.
The walking school bus is essentially a walking route that will pick people up along the route. And so it would have a predetermined starting point and obviously the ending being at the school, and then predetermined stops along the way, just like a normal bus would.
I think it would be fun to walk to school myself. Like, I've often wanted to do that, to walk to school by myself and just like do things without asking permission.
They get more responsible, and so they can do more stuff when they're adults.
Be independent.
On the bus.
No, I'm the boss.
Independent mobility is much more than the trip to and from school. It really is about getting to any destination in your neighbourhood, whether it's walking to the shops, whether it's walking to the park. And I think if you're walking to the park, you're going to the park to be physically active. We certainly know from research, when kids are at the park, they're much more physically active when they're by themselves and playing with other kids than they are when a parent is watching over them, who is restricting them, who is making sure, look, don't climb that high up in the tree. So I think kids are much more physically active when they are independently mobile.
When you see other children playing outside, you automatically think, oh, it's a safe environment. My kids can go outside as well. The friendliness, if other adults are, walking around, there are people running in the park, it's a lively neighborhood. Basically, it's a child-friendly environment. That is a positive thing, and it really does influence their levels of independent mobility. Parents feel more comfortable letting their children go outside into the local park instead of having them just in the front yard of their home.
How do you guys feel when you're playing with the neighborhood kids on Henry Street? So that's the street right behind our backyard.
Don't feel lonely. I feel because we're doing something fun, and it's often with Colton, our neighbor, and sometimes we even lose track of time.
They play more outside than they used to as that independence has been given to them, right? The increase in actual activity. Now it's kind of like, oh, I ran out of time to have my screen time. Fabulous. Like, that's a great problem, and that's because you were out playing and being a kid. I love it.
We also know from research that we have done that kids who are walking to and from school are interacting with their neighbourhood, with the environment. That we did a great photo voice study where we had kids take photos of their trip to and from school, and just comparing kids who walked to kids who were driven. You saw much more photos, obviously, of nature, of the environment, of the world around them. Kids who were driven, you saw pictures of outside the window, of blurred images.
The leading cause of death for kids in this country is car crashes. It's kids in cars. What we've seen parents do is actually that instead of letting their kids walk to school or walk in places, they feel like they're keeping them safe by driving them from one place to another. not recognizing that in fact that they are putting their kids at greater risk.
You can follow. Yep. We're riding down the road, and all of a sudden overhead, I see this osprey. And the osprey has got a fish in his talons, and I blow my whistle and I said, everybody off the road. And I said, do you see that osprey? Let's follow that osprey. We went down to the pond and we watched this osprey rip apart a fish. We stood there for 10 minutes just sort of in awe. I want to help kids experience being outside. And cycling is outside. You're in the air is blowing through your hair. It's a beautiful thing. And then you can get to places that are beautiful too. And there's a real need for that in kids, to find those places in the natural world. So this program is called Cycling into the Future. And what we do is we do 6 sessions with kids in school. We teach them rules and safety. We teach them how to repair a tire, which is actually one of their favorite things. Then we do some practice riding on the schoolyard. And then we take them out on the road. And at the end of it all, we have an assessment. We're going to walk our bikes down to that first driveway there, and then we're going to have a little gathering, and we're going to talk about a few things, and we'll get going, okay?
Phil had reached out to us and had shared what the program was all about, and we thought that would be a fantastic opportunity for our students. It's getting our students active. They're sitting for a long day, and as much as we try to keep them busy while they're here, they do sit a lot. When they come in the morning and they've either walked or rode their bikes to school, they are much more ready to learn. They're excited, they seem more awake, and they seem to last their days a lot better.
In the assessment, we asked them some questions about the meaning of what does cycling mean for you. And one of the things they say, it comes up a lot, is independence. They talk about the independence that they get from riding bike. They also talk about range, they don't use that word, but I use that word. Like they can go further, they can go places they weren't able to go before.
I biked down all the way down there, and then I came up here once.
Wait, which is your belt set?
Oh, I'm very fine with biking on the road.
If we can get kids moving about on their own, if we can empower them and build their own skills on how to do that, it will help us feel better as educators and as parents to be able to help them do that, knowing that we've given them the skills.
When we get back and they've done what we've taught them to do and they've sort of made it, there's this sense of, I did it.
Active kids are creative kids, and it gives them a chance to use their imagination. So jumping in a puddle even could be a portal to another dimension. Children can interact with their environment, interact with their friends, and this creativity really comes through.
It's important for parents to know that play is a safe activity. There is the opportunity to provide them with those chances to get out, to play, to take risks, because the likelihood of something serious happening is incredibly low. And yet the benefits that the kids get from those experiences is incredible.
I think we're starting to see a recognition, an acknowledgement that we are perhaps imposing too much of ourselves, too much restriction onto our children, and that in a way we're stopping them from being kids, stopping them from playing. So I really think that we have reached a point where we understand that, and that we are starting to think about ways in which we can change the culture, ways in which we can change the environment that is much more conducive for kids to go back to being kids.
In fact, there have been a few times where I've left the house because I've had an early morning meeting or something, and I've left the house while she's still been home. And I go off to my meeting and I don't even give it a thought. I know she's gonna lock the door. I know she's gonna be okay. I know she's gonna get herself off to school fine. in terms of all of the different parts of her life that it has filtered into. I wish I had given her even more independence even earlier. And with my son, who's a little bit younger, I think we'll start him on some of these journeys even earlier.
That's not fair.
Well, because you've taught me how great it is. When you give them the independence, what you're saying is, I believe in you, you can do this. And that's a really great positive message for your child to hear, and they tend to live up to your expectations. And if you have high expectations, they'll live up to them. It's been wonderful for me as a parent, just seeing her grow and mature.